Everybody's got a story. You just have to listen. Oh, I'm Joe Pardavila, and this is Good Listen. And we often talk about the gig economy these days. The fact that the 9 to 5 job is sort of going out like the dodo bird. But there's one gig that's been around forever that people don't even think about it as a freelance job, and that's acting. Yeah, actors go from one job to another, just sort of like people do in the gig economy. So I was always curious, like, what's it like these days to be in that middle ground? Not like the big movie star and not someone who's just kind of getting started, but what it's like working, making a living in this sort of gig economy. And my guest today is Sarah Pribis, and she is living it. And she has one of those faces where you're like, where have I seen you before? There's a pretty good chance you probably saw her on that very popular game show app, HQ, a few years ago. But she's an accomplished actress, has worked everywhere from Broadway to the big screen. And so we're going to get into how she's making a living, what she's doing, and what is her purpose in life now that she knows what it's like to be an actor. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And so, one of the things I want to start with is talking about the actor's hustle. And it's the thing I probably respect the most in working actors is just the daily grind, what you have to do to let out that creative energy, which means sometimes taking shitty jobs. And the way we met was when you were bartending and you came on the radio shows we were doing I think it was like Cocktail Fridays, and you made a cocktail on the air with us. And that's sort of how we first got connected. So that's one of the ways of part of the grind, bartending, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I bartended, gosh, for probably like 15, 16 years, something like that, until I finally was able to exit hospitality as a survival job. But, that's not the only kind of shitty job. I think there's a common misconception, right, that in the acting world, you're either super famous and successful or you're like a starving artist and there's no in between. But as you and I both know very well, there actually most of the portion of actors is in the in between. And that includes all of these jobs that people don't traditionally think of when it comes to acting. So, like you're doing corporate videos, let's say. I do like security training videos sometimes. So I don't want to call those things like shitty jobs because they pay the bills and I'm still getting to do something that I like doing, which is better than bartending. But is it the thing that I went to school for that I was like dreaming of having my name in the credits of like an HBO show? Yeah, like not so much.
Yeah, and it's funny. When I say shitty job in terms of bartending, we made you come in at like an ungodly hour to make cocktails, which was probably the earliest you had ever made a cocktail. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning. So that must have been pretty awful for someone who's, again, burning the candle at both ends. And it's funny. So last season, I had Mike Houston on. And I'm not sure if you ever worked with him before, but he was on Orange is the New Black, working actor, very much like you. One of these people that like consistently gets work, doesn't have to work those quote unquote shitty jobs. And we joked about the smallest check he ever got. And I know you talk about this a lot on your social media feeds, but he shared that he was on a Juliana Margulies show that was on Fox. It was on for like a hot minute. I think it was called Canterbury's Law, and he got a he got a residual check once for a penny.
I've gotten them.
You've gotten penny residuals, I assume.
I have. And it's funny because I have like a tradition on my channels where we open up the checks together and everyone sort of guesses in the comments like what they think it's going to be. And people get so mad too. They're like, why don't you set up like it costs more to send that check than than you're gonna make. And I think it's just like the fun of it, the tradition. Like I could set up automatic deposits at this point, but like I don't know. There's something hilarious to me that, you're getting a penny for something you did, 6 years ago.
And what was there one that stands out recently that you did during your reveals on TikTok about the randomness of like you even forgot you did the job? Because like I said, you are a very busy human being. So do some of these checks come and be like, what was that I did? Like, because that happens to me all the time. Like, oh wait, I did that like 10 years ago. I don't even remember that happening. I'm sure that happens a lot with you.
Yeah, it happens. I will say, like, my residual checks from television, I'm still not having had the resume where it's like, I have so many television shows that I forget where they came from. Also, I will say that the residual checks are all marked with, like, obviously where they came from. Um, but I will say that one of my shitty jobs that I had earlier on was being an audiobook narrator. Listen, I have friends who make a ton of money from this. That is their full time career now. So no shade to that. For me, it was I did not like it. It's not for me being stuck in a New York City sized closet for hours on end, just like recording audiobooks. But I will get residuals, checks, kind of, I guess we can call them that, from that because I had like sort of like commission based deals early on in my career where authors would structure them that like I would just make a portion of whatever their sales were. So yes, I will get checks from audiobooks sometimes and I'm like, what was this book that I read? So I would say those are the more surprising ones to me.
And not only the difficulty, you mentioned how hard it is to be locked in a booth. I tell people I've worked in audio my entire life. There's nothing I've done harder than record an audiobook. I've recorded multiple audiobooks for other authors and my own. And I will tell you, of everything I've done in my career, it is by far the hardest. And people don't realize that. Like, aren't you just basically reading? It's not like you have to memorize, but like the fact that when you're reading something that says, this is not, you can't say this isn't. Like you can't like normally start joining prepositions and stuff like that. How hard was that for you? I mean, you're obviously a talented actor, so it probably wasn't so hard for you. But like for me, I was like, Jesus, this is really, really hard.
So I do a lot of work with a teleprompter as a host. So I will say I'm very good at being word perfect when it comes to reading a script. So that was not the issue for me. I think that the couple of things that were the most challenging for me were being very conscious of the mouth noises that I make. So breathing and clicking of the tongues, like all that stuff, right? It's so hard to listen to yourself back and just being more aware of just grabbing a breath before things because all of that stuff is so noticeable. And the other thing is my first audiobook that I did, I don't know why I committed to this, probably because I wasn't getting a whole lot of offers, was about Budapest. And there was Hungarian in it. So I was actually speaking another language that I was completely unfamiliar with for parts of the book. So I would have to go over pronunciations with the author and then go into the audiobook session. And it was just like, it took me so, so long to get through that book.
I can't even imagine. And you didn't have that Adrian Brody brutalist AI to help
No.
you with it. Now, did you have any idea while you were saying it what the words were, or you were essentially just like regurgitating what you were supposed to say? Like, did you have any context in terms of what you were saying?
I did, yes. The author was actually very good, in walking me through everything. Again, it was like her first book. It was my first audiobook. And so I was very comfortable with the material, I suppose, like in understanding what I was actually saying in the context. But just like trying to get those pronunciations right was very difficult.
That's funny. I know a bunch of the work you've also done. You've done like reenactments, and I think that was one of your first jobs was a reenactment job. And a
Yeah.
couple years ago, I spoke to Joe Kenda. He's the homicide hunter, and me and my wife would watch the show. And the guy who played Joe Kenda was exponentially more handsome than Joe Kenda. I'm like, this guy looks nothing like Joe Kenda. And I even asked Joe, like, how did that even happen? He goes, well, we gave like the producer some pictures of me when I was in my 40s. And then they kind of just picked, I had no control. I'm like, I don't know about that. I think you really wanted to pick a handsome person. But when it comes to these reenactments, and because he'd described it as like all these pictures in our book, and it's almost like shopping in the old Sears catalog. You're like, oh, this one, this one. What was that experience like doing the reenactment stuff?
Reenactments are so silly, but they're so helpful, I will say, for actors who are just getting started because it's such a great opportunity to be on set and like learn what it's like, working with other actors and like a real film crew and all of that stuff. But I definitely did. Oh gosh, I probably did about 4 or 5 of them. My first like intimate scene was in a reenactment. So that was really, really funny because I think it was like my first kiss that I had to do on camera. I definitely was in lingerie. This was like for a Discovery ID show. So like it was not R rated. Like this was very much like PG. And this one was actually okay, so this was for a show called Scorned Love Kills. The episode was called Hot for Teacher. I was the teacher. And it took place in the 80s. So I had to wear this ridiculous permed wig. If anybody has seen the movie To Die For with Nicole Kidman, that film is based on this real story. So I was actually playing Nicole. Was it Nicole's role? But anyway, basically, the teacher ends up having an affair with her student. Um,
And
and
convinces the student to kill her husband, right? Am I remembering that
Yep,
correctly? Okay.
yep.
All right. So people may recognize your face from HQ, the very popular game show app. They're like, wait a minute, I know this person. Oh yeah, from HQ. And as we all know, there was it was like this immediate rise and then almost as immediate fall. And you were one of the hosts on it. And recently there was a documentary, and you've documented this on your social media feeds about the fact that you were not invited to participate in this said documentary. And you talked about the fact that yeah, I mean, we're using the word we start from top shitty. There's some shit going on behind the scenes there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the perfect example of what I was saying because I am one of the few people who knows the real story behind what happened, why I'm not in the CNN documentary. In fact, I don't even have all of the information. I'm speculating as to why based on things that have happened that I have not shared with the public because I don't know. At the end of the day, my life is pretty good. I'm not trying to burn bridges. And so, like transparently shared parts of my experience that I hoped would be helpful to others. Again, and sort of like, what the public is thinking. They're like, oh, this is this amazing game show that's like, giving these people a platform and careers and like what an exciting time. And like, yes, it was all of those things. And also, for me at least, like it was a very stressful experience at the same time as being fun. But like I was constantly worrying that this was going to be the biggest opportunity I ever had. How was I going to keep it and not lose it? And like so it was difficult for me to enjoy it a lot of times in the moment because I was so focused on like maybe losing this thing someday. Um and I think that is the lesson that like I wanted to bring people rather than like this is what actually happened behind the scenes that caused so much stress. No, it's more like, hey, like now when I go into future jobs, I try to like enjoy the experience rather than like be so fearful of like, oh, I could lose this job or like what if I'm not perfect? What if they don't like me? Like I try to take those lessons, bring them to the internet rather than be like, hey, this is literally all the tea as to what happened behind the scenes because again, at the end of the day too, like as humans, we are imperfect creatures. We all make mistakes. I don't want to judge someone's actions or how they behaved in a moment, unless it's like very to the point where like it needs to be reported to someone because like somebody's in danger. It's not. I'm going to say, hopefully they grew from this. Maybe they're going through a really hard time, and that they were in their own like fear pattern, and that's sort of why they acted the way they did. So, I don't need to like take to the internet to say all this nasty stuff about people. Like I'd rather, say the things that are going to be helpful for those. But yeah, again, there's two sides to every coin and while it was a very fun experience, like there was a lot of chaos and tension and stress.
Yeah, I think that what was the problem with HQ, just again from I'm watching some of the documentary, reading the story, is that it was a confluence of arts and startup. And I don't think those two things go very well because in terms of soft skills and management, it's so very different. And in terms of your own personal development, what did you learn about yourself because of this? Because I think many people can relate to be like, oh my God, I've got this job. Maybe not my dream job, but this could be the job that leads to my dream job. And you put all this added pressure on yourself because like you said, you've been working a long time, but now you've got something that is being seen on the screens of hundreds of millions of people. So why do you think you were putting that pressure on yourself? Was it because of all these, or was it behind the scenes stuff with the people you're working with, or just you were putting the pressure on yourself?
I think it was both. I think it was a lot of pressure that I was putting on. At the end of the day, I definitely think the stress could have been happening and the pressure could have been happening from other people. And like, I'm still in control of the way that I show up. So I could have been like, well, this is happening, but also I'm going to choose to like do my best, let it go and have a good time. And I did. And I also let it be affected by my own like personal beliefs, I guess, about myself. And so, I think one thing for me was that because a lot of the people who were hosting or, were like comedians, I felt that I needed to also be a comedian. And so I really like structured my material in a way that like a stand up would, even though I wasn't a stand up and like placed pressure on myself to like be funny rather than be the like person that I went in and auditioned as, right? Like I went in as myself and I think along the way I was like I kept trying to be what I thought they wanted me to be. rather than like stay true to myself. So that's something I've really learned and I carry with me because, at the end of the day, when I'm sending in audition tapes, like I don't know what casting wants at the other side of it. And in fact, I think half the time they don't even know what they want. So it's like my responsibility to bring me to the role and be like, hey, this is my authentic take on this. If it's right for it, great. If it's not, then on to the next thing. And so I think that's been a very helpful thing that I've taken from this. I also like you said, I think I had really made it out to be that like this was going to be my big break, or it was my big break that would, again, maybe it wasn't the actual dream job, but it would be the thing that led to the next thing. And I really just like placed a lot of pressure on it being the game changer for me. And I think what I've really learned is like there is no one game changer at the end of the day in this career or in anybody's life. Like there are things that shape us and mold us. But everything is a stepping stone. Um, I really have started to understand too from that and onward that like, you know, I'm the type of person who I will never be satisfied. And for I'm doing a lot. I've done a lot of work around it, but like I am learning that like I have lofty goals and the goalposts keep moving as I hit the next goal and the next goal. So if I can't learn to enjoy, the journey as I'm going, then I will never be happy and I will never be satisfied. So like I truly that was one of the first experiences where I was like, "Oh, I need to try to like just like enjoy every single job that I get and take it for what it is and not be worried about what's going to come after or what it means or what I can get out of it. Like it's great to be curious about those things, but like it doesn't need to be the end all be all. Um yeah, so I think yeah, again a lot of it was my pressure. But I also do think there was some where they did it again. They weren't sure what they were looking for. They were juggling a lot of like I think there were tensions at the top of their company that were sort of trickling down. So like, that ripple effect is always felt underneath.
Often in the show, the idea of cliches come up, and I always quote Scorsese on this, and Scorsese once said, "The reason cliches are cliches is they're true." And I feel in this case, the one is timing is everything. Like almost like the time in your life that you got HQ, probably you weren't prepared for. Maybe now, if HQ came around, you'd be prepared for. So, what do you think about this idea of timing and things happening in your life? And then, of course, the other cliches, things happen for a reason. But we're not going to go into that one. But I'm just saying, in terms of the time in your maturity, in your development, do you think it was just like that was probably the right gig at the wrong time?
I think it was the right gig at the right time because
Okay.
I think if I hadn't learned these lessons, um, I, I don't know. I'm glad I learned them when I did because, if this opportunity came around now, I would handle it so differently. It probably would be maximized in a way like now, if, now there's also like TikTok and I have a bigger TikTok presence that I would probably be using to like but so it's like, yeah, we could play that game where it's like how much more effective would this job be now? But I really do like going to that second cliche, like believe like everything happens for a reason. I will say like along the same lines, I when I dive into the story on my social about sort of like I had been hosting for HQ for a year and a half, right? And then they sort of ghosted me, or they did ghost me, basically, is what happened. After I was hosting basically a game a day for like a year and a half and got the company off, helped get the company off the ground. And just nothing. And it drove me insane. I literally was like, what happened? I no one offered a reason. And it sent me into a spiral for a while. Um, and when I finally had moved on and gotten over that, and that's because other amazing opportunities fall in my lap. I shot like Dirty John in LA. I booked like a CW. Like I had started booking some other things and like so I was like, okay, like I'm starting to feel like this wasn't the end for me. Like it was actually just the beginning. But truly, and then as soon as I had like sort of mourned the loss of HQ, that is when the founder like reached back out, like an ex-boyfriend, literally a text was like, "Hey, you want to come host a game?" And I was like, "You're kidding." Like it was like a you up text almost, right?
Wow.
And I was like, I don't need answers. I just actually want to go back and do this the way that I wish I had from the beginning. And now that I've already lost it, I really don't feel like I have anything to lose because I know that life exists on the other side of this. And so I was able to go back in and have an amazing time and do what I really wish that I had done the first time. And so like that really did show me that it was the right thing at the right time because like if that also had happened to me and I had continued on with HQ until the very end like without that big gap in the middle, I think, like, I would have had a much harder time bouncing back, whereas, like, because it happened the way it did, I really was able to, like, learn those lessons and bring those into my future jobs.
Okay, cool. So now that we've gotten to this point where you're successfully working, you're still grinding and doing things that you have to do to put bread on the table. What brings you the most joy in terms of this? Like after you've been through a lot of shit and a lot of drama and a lot of like just waiting for the phone to ring. What brings you joy now at this point in your life when you're work? Is it just the work itself?
No. No, I love the work. I mean, first and foremost, like, what a freaking privilege and a luxury to be able to love my job. Like, I no jo I will never I'm gonna cry. Like, I will never spend a day taking that for granted. Like, I love what I do. Even the more mundane things, like, I just think it is the coolest thing ever that my life feels like an adventure. Like, it's actually the thing that I used to fear a lot, which is like, "Ooh, I don't know what's next. How am I gonna pay my bills?" And I have learned to love that. I'm like, "Oh, no 2 days are the same. I actually have no idea what's around the corner. Like, this is so exciting." But, like, truly, like, to be able to create content both for social media and then also, like, help other artists and filmmakers and storytellers, tell those stories, like, I love it. So I that definitely brings me joy. Um, I also think seeing my own progress brings me a lot of joy. Both again, just like with the resume itself, like just seeing how like this truly is a marathon, not a sprint, and like looking back, let's say on old self tapes, even, or even just like my old performances, and being like, oh my gosh, like wow, like the growth is phenomenal. Like that, it's just again, we can never compare ourselves to other people. We will often try. I'm so guilty of that. But like the most, like it's so rewarding to look back and be like, and not to be mad, not to be like, oh, that was so bad. Like, why was I doing? No, to be like, oh, that's where we're at, and this is where we're at now. Like, how freaking cool is that we've like come so far? So I love that. And I think like the third thing would be I really do love sharing my life on social media and being very transparent about what it looks like to be a working actor and also to be sober and talk about mental health because knowing that I'm helping people, like getting the messages from people like you inspired me to keep going today, like whether that's as an actor or in their sobriety, or like I'm restarting, like I've been working a corporate job and like I'm diving back into acting classes because of you. Or like thanks for giving me hope that like I could actually make a living wage from this someday. Like that is, I think I never thought that like I would find purpose in it sounds so terrible, but like find purpose in helping others. But like that actually is where I find the most purpose. It's not in like being on set necessarily. It's literally knowing that like I don't know, like you could like it's I guess it's change. I'm not saving lives in the way someone is in a hospital, but like emotionally being able to contribute to someone to like decide that they want to like do something that they're scared of. Like, I know what it was like for people who shaped my life in that way. And like, it's so special. So like, I feel very grateful to be able to show up for people that way.
That's awesome. It's funny. So a few years ago, I made a short film, and I was lucky enough to cast this actress who's like legit. Her name's Chloe Farnworth. She was just in that Pearl sequel last summer, and I remember we were like shooting the shit as you do on a set because there's a lot of downtime. And I say, "What is it about being an actor that you love?" And she goes, I love being on a set. Like, she gets so much joy of like, the acting and creating part, but there's some so tell me about that, like, on the set feeling. We kinda hinted earlier about the camaraderie and connections you build, but what is it like just being surrounded by a bunch of people that all kind of have the same goal? And I know in regular jobs you have that, but it's not so, like, in your face, whereas on a set, you see everyone, whether it's the grip, the gaffer, the makeup person, they're all focused on making sure this one thing is amazing, and they're all playing their part in it. What does it feel like for you?
I mean, I think you said it really perfectly. Like, I think that's the thing. I mean, there is something, there's just something about being on a set in a production with like people who like for the most part, like have worked very hard to be there, have taken risks to be there. Sure, there's the exception to that, but like most of the people that are on a set are there because they love it, and because they couldn't see themselves doing anything else. And so they took that risk and they worked hard enough to get that job. And like there's just something magical. I think it's also like for me, like it's finally that world, that moment I'm able to show up and play make believe. I mean, depending on what it is, like, again, like I was on this commercial set last week and I wasn't playing make believe there. I was like delivering a very jargon like heavy script. But, there are these moments where like you really finally get to like you're like, "Oh, this is what I worked for." Like this is where all of those hours of unpaid self tapes and prep and everything like has led to. And like there's just something also like just being pampered in the hair and makeup chair and then like having people like, "Hey, can I get you water?" Like, and then just like working with others, like there's nothing like working with a director who's just like so collaborative and then DP who like, like I had a really an amazing experience on set this past year on a movie where like it just felt so collaborative and that we were all just like in that magic together. Yeah, it is hard to explain, but I think you did a really really good job explaining it.
Cool. Well, thank you. I just stole Chloe toy, but I appreciate that. You talk about how you look fondly at some of your past jobs, and just recently, Guy Pearce went viral because I guess he hadn't watched himself a Memento, and that was like 20 years ago, and until recently, because I think they were doing like a retrospective, and he's like, looking back at it, I'm like, I was terrible. I was really bad, and he said, I understand why I've never been in another Christopher Nolan movie because I was so bad. Now, us who watched the film, to me, I think it's one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time, but, like, he looks back at it, like, now, X number of years later, after all the miles he put in, all the time he put in, to be like, "Oof, I was really bad in that." Do you have any it seems like you've got more fonder memories of it, but do you look back at some of your past work and be like, "Ooh, man, I wish."
Oh,
No?
yes, 100%. Oh my gosh, like they are cringe moments. I think it's like a perspective thing. Like I'm looking at the same moment and I'm like, no, that is crit, like that's terrible. But also I can be like, what was I thinking? Or it can be like, oh, that's just like where I was at the time. And like, thank God I've gotten better and like wow, how amazing. I made a video showing one of my I think it was like it's funny because their self-tapes didn't really exist pre-pandemic, like, they did, but, like, not as much as they yeah, not as much as they do now. So I didn't have that many self-tapes from pre-pandemic, from, like, earlier on in my career because most of auditions were done in person. But I have a few, and I actually found one of my earliest, and I literally, like, my phone is set up in vertical landscape. I am in my messy bedroom in the dark, sitting on my bed, holding the script. I didn't even memorize my lines. And my boyfriend, who is not an actor, and like, I love him, he is the best, but he does not read lines with me anymore because his voice is just like so he's like one of those voices that like it's distracting because it's like it's a great voice. So like and he's also like kind of stumbling over the words. It just like was a terrible audition tape from technically from top to bottom. And I put it on social media because I just thought it was so helpful maybe to others, but I was also like it took me a minute to gather the courage to even put it on social media because I was like, "Ooh, they're going to judge me. They're going to be like this girl is bad. What if she's still this bad?" Um, but it was funny because people's similar to that, like people's reception was actually really surprised me. They were like, "Well, sure, like it's dark and you're in your messy bedroom and the phone isn't in the correct format, but actually like you could tell that you're actually quite good." And so it was very interesting for me to see that because I was like, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I literally would never have called me in for anything ever again. In fact, for a minute, I was like, is this how I was going into auditions? Like, no wonder I don't have like these incredible like relationships with like the TD casting directors. Maybe I blackballed myself. No, like we all start somewhere.
Well, it's been a blast catching up with you, Sarah. I'm really looking forward to see what happens next to you. And one thing that I do know about you, Sarah, is you will not lay low. You are going to keep grinding. You're going to keep doing your thing. So if folks want to keep track of what's going on in your life, where should they start, Sarah?
I'm on all the social media platforms, at Sarah Pribis, my name. And yeah, hope to connect with you there.
Awesome. Sarah, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Good Listen. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to connect with me, go to joepardavila.com. My socials, my blog, past episodes are there. If you're watching this on YouTube, tap that thumbs up button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel. If you are watching or listening on Spotify, a 5-star review would be very sweet. And if you're listening on Apple, a 5-star review would equally be as sweet. Thanks again. I will see you next time. Adios.